Welcome back to Zakir Naik proving the existence of hell to an atheist. One answer to one question he was asked, 4-part video from me. It's that bad. Let's continue.
If you use science to the Quran, what we come to know that whatever the Quran has said today, 80% can be proved to be 100% correct scientifically.
They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
Quran speaks about various scientific facts, which we came to know recently. It talks about astronomy.
See my series on There Is No Clash? It definitely does not talk about astronomy with anything approaching accuracy.
It speaks about the spherical nature of the earth.
You mean that is shaped like an ostrich egg? I did a video on that too. It wasn't about you, but it was about some guy who is pathetically desperate in his attempt to imitate you.
It speaks about the Big Bang.
Also, my There Is No Clash videos. Those covered quite a broad range of topics, about all of which the Quran is tragically stupid.
It speaks about the light of the moon is not its own reflected light.
Think I've talked about that in a video? I think. I'm not sure what video. It might be in my Islam playlist somewhere, I don't know. If I haven't done it, I'm at least not going to do it here, maybe I'll get to it. I feel like I remember doing it, but I also feel like I don't. Which reminds me about a completely unrelated story that has nothing to do with this whatsoever, and I will tell you just to waste some time. Or to give myself a break from this. So I got my kid Mousetrap, the board game, for her birthday. She's 6, by the way, in case any longtime viewers want to feel really old. And I get asked this a fair amount, but yeah, she's doing great. She's very clever, determined, tough, well-behaved, self-controlled. Couldn't ask for better. She's the best. And no, now that she's not a baby anymore, she's not going to show up in any videos. Maybe a brief voice thing here and there, but certainly not on camera. I think that addresses the most regular questions. So anyway, I got her Mousetrap, and I was a bit weirded out. I thought, man, did they change this game somehow? This is not the game I thought it was. I mean, I never had the game when I was a kid, and neither did my friends. I only saw it on TV, in commercials. But I was convinced that the mice were made in molds out of, different color Play-Doh, and then there were multiple traps, and one of the traps was a boot that could come down and squish the mice. But in the game we have, the mice are hard plastic, and there's only one trap, which is a Rube Goldberg machine that eventually results in a cage coming down on top of the plastic mouse. And I remembered that cage. I knew it had that, but I just thought there was more. And I thought, what is this? This is kind of, it's fun. It's an interesting little contraption, but it's just not what I thought it was going to be. And so I went and started looking it up, and it turns out Mousetrap is a pretty old game. It's been around since long before I was born. And fundamentally, the trap hasn't changed at all. A bit of the design and colors and stuff has changed, but the basic device is the exact same as it always has been. And so I started really trying to figure out what my 4, 5, 6-year-old brain might have conflated it with, or what it might have just been falsely conflated with over the almost 30 years since. I'm no stranger to false memory. I don't immediately jump to the conclusion that reality is wrong and I'm right. But it is jarring. Very jarring in this case, in fact, because I was quite convinced that I knew what this game was. And so I searched and I couldn't find anything until finally I realized who could help me with this problem. And I typed in Mousetrap Game Mandela Effect. Because if there's one group of people who are good at cataloging false memories that occur in a broad scope of the population based on similar inputs on a mass scale, like international TV advertisements, despite their kookiness, they do have their uses. And I found it in one reply on one Reddit post. The game I was apparently combining with Mousetrap in my head is called Grape Escape, and I don't remember ever hearing of it by name, and I don't directly remember the imagery, but it feels very familiar. And in this game, you create little people in molds out of colored Play-Doh type stuff, and there are multiple traps which in different ways maim and squish them, one of which is a boot that steps on them. Now, in the details, there's not too much similar about these games, but they do both have complicated plastic mechanical contraptions used to trap or, punish the player pieces, situated in the center of the board, very colorful and all that. And the 90s version of the Mousetrap game didn't have the modern, cartoonish-looking mice. It had very simplistic, small, roundish mice, which look like they could be made out of Play-Doh in a mold, just like the Grape Escape characters. So I think it's pretty plain to see how this false memory probably was formed. Like I say, not very related to the topic, but with regard to me possibly addressing the issue of the moon not being its own light source at some point in the past, just like Grape Escape, I don't directly remember the thing in question, but it feels familiar. Although I have watched other people talk about the same thing, so it's possible it just feels familiar because of that. Similar to how people are always telling me what a great video I made, and it turns out it was was one of Armored Skeptic's videos. That happens constantly. And sometimes I think I made a video and it was somebody else's too. So, I can't even blame you.
It speaks about the water cycle.
I for sure made a video about that, but that was a Patreon one. Did I mention my Patreon yet? Buy my video cassette.
It speaks about biology, it speaks about botany, it speaks about zoology, it
So it mentions plants and animals.
speaks about embryology.
Definitely talked about that. Either some random guy or Abu Bakr Siddiq or... I don't know. I don't have a catalog of my videos in my head.
All these things.
None of those things. Like I say, I've addressed the majority of what you just mentioned, and of what I've addressed, 100% of it is junk. 100% of the time. And that's the best you've got for proving the Quran is true? Or sorry, 100% true 80% of the time?
Now, today is the age of science and technology. If we put this test of science to the Quran, what we come to know, 80% whatever the Quran has said is 100% perfectly correct.
At least you're confident. There's something to be said for self-esteem, right?
The balance 20% is ambiguous. Neither right, neither wrong.
Oh good, ambiguity. That's real helpful in a book from God about the universe and how to live your life.
Out of that 20%, not even 0.01% has been proved to be wrong.
Well yeah, you said it's ambiguous and neither right nor wrong, so like a gray zone. Either that or just either unfalsifiable or unfalsified, but also not shown to be true.
By scientific fact. It is ambiguous.
Okay, so either we'll accept that the claim is too ambiguous to be proven right or wrong, or if that's not what you mean by ambiguous and you just mean not yet demonstrated to be true or false, then for now we'll just not believe it, and then later, when the evidence comes along, then we'll believe it. I mean, this is important stuff, right? It's pretty critical that we get this right. So we wouldn't want to jump to conclusions. Better withhold judgment.
What my logic says,
Always an ominous phrase coming out of your mouth.
when 80% is 100% correct, and not even 0.01% of the 20% is proved wrong, so my logic says that inshallah, even that 20% will be correct.
God willing it will? Okay. What if he's not willing? What if that's the troll part?
It's a logical belief.
That crowd is just something else.
I, being a medical doctor, Quran speaks about astronomy, embryology, genetics, everything perfect.
You being a medical doctor think it's perfect in all those areas. I hope your patients are seeking second opinions.
Then you ask me, brother, you being a doctor, you believe in hell? You believe in heaven? You believe in jinn? You believe in life after death? So my logic says, inshallah, even the other 20% in the Quran, which science hasn't reached up to that level. Science cannot prove it. Maybe science will prove 50 years later or 10 years later. But today science hasn't reached that level. So in this way, I believe whatever 20% which science hasn't proved to be right or wrong, inshallah, even that will be right.
Okay, so just to be clear about what's being claimed here. The Quran supposedly makes some scientific claims, which supposedly are verified. Now, of course, in reality, if you actually look at the arguments that are being made for this, the verses that are being quoted are ambiguous at best, referring to something completely different at worst. They're being bent and twisted, in some cases outright broken, or totally retranslated inaccurately, to suit the preferred narrative, which is the Quran is in line with modern science. It's a bunch of post hoc justification of a bunch of verses that easily align with what would be expected of 7th century Arabian knowledge. Much of it inherited from the Greeks, including the inaccuracies, and most of it just vague poetic statements of a mythological understanding of the universe. But setting that aside, let's see what's actually being said here. The Quran makes, say, 100 claims. 80 of those concern real-world, non-supernatural, experimentally testable, or observable phenomena, right? Stuff about space, embryos, biology, and so on, stuff that people have figured out independently, scientifically, through practical, real-world means because they're studying things that aren't supernatural. Now you could say, hey, these people were ahead of their time. They knew stuff that nobody could possibly have known, that they didn't even have the technology to know. Okay, I mean, obviously, every time you actually look into it, that's not true. But if it were true, what would it mean? It would mean they were right by chance. I mean, it's not like they're coming up with complex mathematics and extremely precise stuff. They're vaguely talking about how the world works. Very, very sort of poetic, abstract terms. Nothing concrete, nothing precise enough that it's beyond belief that they could possibly have just sort of guessed, and out of all the many, many, many different cultures on Earth, been one that just happened to be right about several things by chance, in vague terms at least. But only the claims about the natural world, only the stuff that's not the supernatural. If this happened, and all of their natural claims were verified, notice how none of their supernatural ones are. The 80% are the naturalistic claims, the 20%, as Zakir says, heaven and hell, jinn, life after death, the number of which are confirmed scientifically is precisely 0. So even if we take the ridiculous arguments on their face and say, Muhammad was a really insightful scientific mind, he had roughly the right intuition about several ideas within science, which is not unprecedented. I mean, look at Epicurus with atomic theory, or Aristarchus with heliocentrism, Ibn Khaldun with biological evolution. All conclusions reached not really through observation and certainly not through experiment, but through mostly reason, and so severely lacking in the abundance of accurate detail that come from the modern scientific method, but all of which, and other examples people could come up with, are at least as detailed and accurate as anything Muhammad came up with. And at least, unlike Muhammad's ideas, their ideas were probably original to them. At Muhammad's best, he just said a bunch of half right and half wrong stuff that he heard from other people. But even if Muhammad's ideas were original to him, and they were, roughly speaking, in their vagueness, still adjacent to the right answer, well, what stops a clever person who likes to think about the world from coming up with kind of sort of right answers just from thinking about it? This doesn't imply anything supernatural. And so why would we assume that if these ideas about the natural world are correct, therefore the ideas about the supernatural world are correct? You might say, yeah, he had a few ideas about the natural world that were shown to be right eventually. Yeah, and 0 about the supernatural, so why are we assuming anything is true about the supernatural? And then, of course, regardless of the natural-supernatural distinction, just being right about one thing or several things does not mean you're right about everything. Don't be ridiculous. And I just want to reiterate, even though I think I have a couple times, Muhammad wasn't right about pretty much anything. Go watch the videos I mentioned. Go watch my Islam playlist, find the ones about Islamic science or that mention it. It is hard to overstate just how utterly shit the arguments are for either Muhammad knowing anything correct that other people hadn't already come up with, centuries before him, or that he wasn't just flat out wrong about a bunch of other stuff. The entire scientific Quran genre of arguments is actually worse than the arguments of young Earth creationists. It's a complete joke.
This is one way to prove about hell and heaven.
Wow, that is really, really uncompelling. Got anything else?
There's another way, simple way.
Okay, good. Okay, so one strike, but now you're gonna knock it out of the park.
Without reading Quran. Brother, I am asking a simple question. Is robbing good or bad?
Oh god, is this gonna be, what's that guy's name? Mustache, Banana? You know who I'm talking about. Is that gonna be that?
Robbing is good or bad?
Robbing is bad.
That's an interesting statement, isn't it? In fact, that's a statement so deep that I think whole books could be written on it. As a matter of fact, whole books have been written on it. Maybe not robbery specifically, but antisocial, harmful actions in general. The question is, when you say robbery is bad, what precisely do you mean? It might sound like a really nitpicky question until you realize that the rest of the conversation here is going to hinge on assuming one specific meaning of the statement, robbery is bad. This can mean many, many different things. This is the basis of moral philosophy. This is why it exists. This is why you have studies in the fields of psychology and sociology and neurology on what exactly morality is, how it manifests, what experience people are having when they come to moral conclusions, what drives moral decisions and underpins moral beliefs. It's a topic that people have obsessed over for thousands of years. And so yeah, most people will agree with you if you say robbery is bad. But what they mean by that might differ wildly from what you mean by that. Their reason for saying it might also vary a lot. Their belief about whether that's a subjective statement, a relative statement, a statement about their group or a broader global society, or about whether it's an objective universal fact are also going to vary. And then, of course, the actual fact of whether it is subjective or whether it is a universal fact or whether it's some combination of the two, not in the same sense at the same time, but subjective in one sense, objective in another. That's also going to have to be examined and agreed upon before we can just flatly say and agree robbery is bad and know what each other are talking about. We can say robbery is bad and agree robbery is bad, but we still don't know what each other means by that. Not until until we dig a little deeper and we actually figure out what we mean by good and bad, what we mean by morality, or even what we mean by robbery, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people will say robbery is bad, but what they mean is robbery is bad from my neighbors, but if I loot a store during a riot, that's just fine. Or looting a store is bad, but pillaging the possessions of my vanquished enemies in battle is fine. Or all of that is wrong, but expropriation for the communist state is fine. And on and on and on. We have to talk about exactly what we mean here. In this particular situation, in normal conversation, you're not going to worry so much about it. You're going to go, wow, that guy got robbed, that sucks. Yeah, that totally sucks. End of conversation. But this is the foundation of a conversation about the origin and nature of morality in general. We're talking moral philosophy here. And if we don't make it clear, especially what the term bad even means, the questioner and the speaker here are just going to be talking past each other. And of course, that's exactly what happens. Zakir Naik is just going to take the word bad to mean exactly what he thinks it means, toss out every other possible interpretation, and just assume from the start that objective, God-demanded universal morality is just an accepted fact.
Bad.
Yeah.
Bad. Yeah.
Raping a girl is good or bad?
No, bad.
Bad.
I will say, though, as annoying as it is that this is the direction this is taking, that we're just assuming, just because, that the speaker and the questioner's morality is objectively true, I still appreciate the strategy here on the part of Naik. I mean, even people who don't follow religions tend to take morality for granted, despite the fact that it's a very religion-like concept. You know, people think it's objectively true that murder is bad, for example. But what defense could most people give you for that beyond just, that's just how it is? I mean, why don't you understand that murder is bad? What's wrong with you? Right? No, it's true because when I was growing up, it was always said to be true. It's true because everyone knows it's true. It's true because I feel it in my heart. It's true because I can't imagine the world being any other way. It's true because if it's not true, what would the consequences be? It'd be terrible. It's a pretty good bet that whoever Zakir Naik's talking to in a room like this is not going to be a moral philosopher. This is not an academic crowd. It's not an academic presentation. They're probably just going to be some normal person who came in to see him talk, and they have a question. If he asks them if robbery is good or bad, or rape is good or bad, the odds are pretty good that it's going to go exactly the same as when, the name is Ray Comfort, that's who I'm trying to think of. It's going to go the same as when Ray Comfort asks some college student what they think about robbery or rape or whatever. And so he takes the shot, and if they do say, yeah, it's just bad, well, now he has his foot in the door, and he can say, but if it's objectively bad, how can that be without a God? And then they can have a conversation about that. It takes the moral argument from a real-world question of how humans work into a conversation about why things would be objectively bad without some God to make it that way. It leads us into the argument for God and hell. Of course, if somebody said, I don't know, is it objectively bad? I don't know, what does that mean? He's had these conversations enough, he probably has some other direction he'll go with that. Questioning subjective morality, arguing why morality has to be objective because, who knows, some reason. But it's a lot easier this way, so he's set up the conversation he wants to have with one question. Pretty good.
Okay, now I'm asking you a question. Logically, I suppose happen to be the biggest mafia. Hypothetically. I am a big robber. You prove to me logically and scientifically. I am a very logical person. I am a scientific person. I am a logical person and scientific person. You prove to me why robbing is bad for me, and I will stop robbing.
Do you notice the built-in assumption there? It's not, you prove to me what the built-in nature of morality within the cosmos is. It's not, you should prove to me why my actions as a big robber mafia boss are not in accordance with objective moral truth. No, it's, you prove to me why robbery is bad for me. Not that it's objectively wrong, not that it's discordant with reality in some way, not that it's out of alignment with my purpose or something like that. Just, how is it bad for me? How does it hurt me? This is an interesting formulation because it actually denies the importance of objective moral truth and turns the conversation from that to purely selfish consequentialism. It doesn't matter what's true, it doesn't matter what's factually good or bad. Objective morality isn't the point. It just matters that I feel good, that I personally don't get hurt. Well, Zakir, you don't need objective morality for this. You don't need God either. None of that enters into this conversation. People are capable of a selfish, consequential calculus with or without God. Isn't that the thing we're trying to combat, not the thing we're trying to encourage?
Only one reason you give me, one good reason why robbing is bad for me, and I will stop robbing.
There it is again. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. You give me one good reason why robbery is bad for me, and I'll stop robbing. Now, I understand fully there are people who think in these terms. They're not people I'm going to have a moral discussion with, in the sense of trying to convince them to act a certain way morally. If their entire worldview is, I matter and everyone else is disposable, there's no point. But of course, that's not most people, is it? And even among the people who do think in those terms, there's enough actual value in human cooperation, enough incentive to behave cooperatively, that even those people will oftentimes make a decision to get along in society. Even big mob bosses understand the value of, for example, tipping at the restaurant and not walking out on the bill. Or as Al Capone found out the hard way, of paying their taxes. You can control people with threats of force, certainly, to an extent, and for a certain amount of time, but it's not going to work on all of society, and it's not going to work forever. Even if you're the leader of the mafia, it's worth getting the people on your side. This is why you had Al Capone setting up soup kitchens and giving tons of money to charity. It's why the Yakuza help people after earthquakes and tsunamis. It's why the Hells Angels do charity to buy bikes and toys for kids. And so on and so on. Are they doing this out of the goodness of their heart? Probably not, but in fact that makes the point stronger. Having a good public image and public perception makes your life a lot easier when you're an organized criminal, to the point that even if it seems like there's no reason for you to do anything socially acceptable, good for the community, you might do it anyway, just because of the way society works. Anyway, gonna cut it there and come back for another part. Thank you very much for watching. Before you go, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. Enormous thanks to all of my supporters on every platform. Sign up to my email list for early access and so I don't lose touch with you. list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.